I'll use pseudonyms and a completely fictional scenario. Here's the story. For privacy reasons, I'll be using pseudonyms throughout this story. My name is Natalie, and what I'm about to share is something I never thought I'd have to go through. But looking back now, I'm grateful for every painful moment of it, because it made me realize exactly who I am and what I'm worth. I'm a certified public accountant. I've been working in financial advisory for over a decade, and I built my reputation quietly, one client at a time, without ever needing to brag about it. My ex-husband, whom I'll call Derek, owned a chain of 3 restaurants here in Ontario. When we met, I was 26 and he was 31. He was charming, ambitious, loud in all the ways I was quiet, and I thought that made us a perfect balance. We got married 2 years after we started dating, and for the first few years, things were genuinely good. I need to be clear about something before I continue, because it matters to everything that happens later. When Derek's restaurant business started expanding, moving from 1 location to 2, then eventually 3, it was actually my financial planning that made that growth possible. I restructured his cash flow, helped him apply for the right business development grants available in Ontario, advised him on when to take on debt and when to sit tight. He would joke with his friends that I was the brains behind the money, and everyone would laugh, including me, because back then it felt like an affectionate compliment, rather than what it actually was, a fact he would eventually use against himself. What I didn't realize was that somewhere between the second and third restaurant opening, Derek had started seeing someone else. Her name, the real one, doesn't matter, so I'll call her Candace. She was younger than me, worked in events management, and had been helping coordinate a corporate dinner at one of his locations. I found out about her the way a lot of people find out about these things, not through some dramatic confrontation, but through something small and stupid. A receipt notification on a shared tablet we used at home. He'd bought jewelry. Not the kind of jewelry you buy for a business acquaintance. When I brought it up, Derek didn't deny it for long. What surprised me was how quickly he pivoted from denial to offense. He told me things had not been working between us for a long time, that I was more interested in spreadsheets than in him, that I made him feel invisible. I sat across from him at our kitchen table in the house we owned together in Mississauga, and I listened to him explain why his cheating was essentially my fault. I was 34 years old. We had been married for 6 years. What came next was what I did not expect. He told me he thought we should separate. He told me he had already spoken to a lawyer. And then he said something that I will never forget, delivered in the most casual tone, as though he were telling me what he wanted for dinner. I've instructed my lawyer to handle everything. You can reach out to him directly. His name is Mr. Holloway. I think it's better if we keep things professional. He handed me a business card. I looked at it. I looked at him. And then I said, very calmly, okay. He seemed almost disappointed by how calm I was. I think he had expected me to cry, or beg, or throw something. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, told him I'd be in touch, and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of our bed for a long time that night, not crying, just thinking, the kind of thinking that happens when your emotions are so large they go quiet, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Here is what Derek did not know, and what I had not yet reminded him of, because in that moment, it hadn't fully surfaced through the shock. 3 years into our marriage, when the second restaurant location was opening and he was nervous about overextending, we had signed a cohabitation and marriage agreement. In Ontario, these agreements are legally binding under the Family Law Act when properly executed. I had drafted the financial disclosure requirements myself. The agreement contained a specific clause Derek's idea, actually, put there because he was proud of his fidelity and wanted, in his words, to put it in writing. The clause stated that in the event of infidelity, proven by documentation, the division of net family property would be adjusted to award me 60% rather than the standard 50%. He had forgotten about it. I know he had forgotten because of what came later. People forget things that no longer feel threatening. I did not forget. I spent 2 days organizing my thoughts. I moved through the house quietly, made notes, reviewed documents, and said very little to Derek, who had taken to sleeping in the guest room, and who seemed to interpret my silence as acceptance of his terms. On the third morning, I called Mr. Holloway's office and made an appointment. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock at his office in downtown Toronto. I dressed the way I dress for client presentations professionally, deliberately, with the specific intention of communicating competence before I say a single word. I took the GO train in, rather than driving, which gave me time to review everything I had brought with me in my laptop bag. Printed copies of the marriage agreement, bank statements, documentation of the gift purchases, cross-referenced against business account withdrawals, and a few other items that I'll get to shortly. Mr. Holloway's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Bay Street. His assistant brought me to a small meeting room and told me he'd be with me shortly. When he walked in, I could see immediately that he had been briefed on what he expected. A distressed wife, probably emotional, probably underprepared, coming in to hear terms she had no real power to negotiate. He stopped when he saw me. Not dramatically, he didn't drop anything or stumble. But there was a very specific kind of pause that people have when something does not match their expectations, and this was that pause. He knew who I was, not personally, but professionally. My firm had been involved in a fairly high-profile financial restructuring case the previous year that had received some coverage in local business media, and my name had appeared in connection with it. He recognized it. "Miss Brennan," he said, and his voice was careful in a way that it probably had not been 30 seconds earlier when he was walking down the hall. "Mr. Holloway," I said. "Thank you for making the time." He sat down. He was polite, but I could see him recalibrating. He asked me how I was, which was a reasonable opener, and I told him I was well, which was almost true. Then I said, "I want to make this as efficient as possible for both of us, so I'm going to be straightforward. I don't think you've been given complete information about this case. I'd like to share some things with you, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions." He said he was listening. I slid the marriage agreement across the table first. I watched his eyes move across the page, find the clause, and stop. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me. "Your husband included this?" he said. At his suggestion, I confirmed. "I have the original drafting notes if you'd like to verify." He looked back at the document. "He didn't mention this to me." "I assumed he hadn't," I said. "He may not have remembered it, or he may have hoped I hadn't." There was a silence. "Mr. Holloway is, I think, a good lawyer." He didn't try to recover the moment with bluster or deflection. He just sat with it. Then I placed the second set of documents on the table. These required a bit more explanation, so I walked him through them methodically. The timeline of purchases, jewelry, hotel stays in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a weekend at a Muskoka resort, all paid using one of the restaurant's corporate credit cards. This is where being a CPA becomes particularly relevant. I had years of access to the financial records for Derek's business, not as his wife but as his financial advisor of record. I had helped prepare those records. I knew every line. Using a business account for personal expenses of this nature, especially when those expenses are concealed from the business's own financial statements, has implications that go beyond a messy divorce. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand enough about financial compliance to know that what I was looking at represented a significant problem for Derek's businesses, independently of anything to do with our marriage. Mr. Holloway went very still. "I'm not here to threaten anyone," I said, "because I wanted to be clear about that. I'm here because my husband asked me to speak with you, and I'm speaking with you. I want this divorce resolved cleanly, correctly, and in accordance with what we both legally agreed to. I would like my 60% share of the net family property, as outlined in the agreement. I would like the process to move forward without delays, and I would like to be treated as someone who understands exactly what she signed and exactly what she is entitled to." Mr. Holloway looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "I was not aware of any of this." "I know," I said, "and I don't think that's your fault." He thanked me for coming in. He said he needed to review everything thoroughly and consult with his client before providing any further guidance. His tone had shifted in a way that was hard to describe precisely. It was the tone of someone who has realized they walked into a room without knowing what was in it. I thanked him for his time, shook his hand, and left. I took the GO train home. I stopped at a cafe in Port Credit and ordered a large dark roast and a butter tart, which felt appropriate somehow, and I sat by the window and watched the lake for a while. I felt clear in a way I hadn't felt in months. The grief was still there. I want to be honest about that, because I think people sometimes expect these stories to be purely triumphant, and grief is not that simple. I had loved Derek. I had built things with him. That loss was real. But underneath the grief, there was also something solid. Something that had always been there, but that I had forgotten, was mine. Derek called me that same evening. I had told him not to contact me directly, that all communication should go through lawyers, and he called me anyway, which told me everything I needed to know about how his conversation with Mr. Holloway had gone. He was not calm. "What did you say to him?" was the first thing out of his mouth, and his voice had that particular edge it got when he was trying to sound in control but wasn't. "He called me today and told me he needs to reassess the case." "What did you do?" I let a moment pass before I answered. "I went and spoke with your lawyer," I said. "Like you asked me to." That's not what I meant." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, Derek. About the marriage agreement and about the credit card statements." Silence. A very particular kind of silence. "Sophia, He caught himself on the wrong name. We'd been together so long that I sometimes thought I knew every version of him. But this flustered, scrambling version was newer, and I found I had very little patience for it. "Natalie, I think we should talk. In person. Before this goes any further." "You told me to communicate through lawyers," I said. "I think that was actually good advice. Good night, Derek." I hung up. He tried 3 more times over the following week. Mr. Holloway, to his professional credit, did reach out to my lawyer. I had retained one of my own by that point, a family law specialist in Oakville, to indicate that he was reviewing the terms of the case. What followed was a period of about 3 weeks, during which Derek apparently cycled through the stages of someone who has realized that the situation is not what they thought it was. I heard through the process that he had tried to dispute the validity of the marriage agreement, which went nowhere, because the document had been properly witnessed and notarized, and both parties had received independent legal advice before signing, as required under Ontario law. He showed up at my parents' house one Saturday morning in November. My mother called me afterward, bewildered. He had asked her to talk to me, to help him make her understand. My mother, who has never liked Derek as much as she let on during our marriage, told him very politely to go home. He reached out to my sister. She did not respond to his messages. And then, about 6 weeks after that first meeting with Mr. Holloway, Derek came to see me himself. I was at the house which I had continued to live in, since I was on the title and had no reason to leave on a Saturday afternoon when he knocked on the door. I saw him through the window first. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and he was wearing a jacket I'd bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, which I'm sure was not intentional but struck me as a strange detail. I let him in. Because I'm not a person who enjoys unnecessary drama, and because whatever I needed to say to him was better said inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked around the room for a moment, in a way that I recognized it was the look of someone who has been away from a familiar place long enough that it feels different now, or maybe who feels different themselves. "I think I made a very serious mistake," he said. "Yes," I said. "You made several." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to get what I was expecting, am I?" "No," I said. "You're not." He rubbed his hand across the back of his neck. "She's gone, you know. Candace. Once things got complicated, she didn't want to deal with it." He said this, not as a manipulation, I don't think, but as the particular kind of confession that comes when someone has run out of other options and is left only with the truth. "I thought she was different." I don't know what I thought. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything that needed to be said. "The business," he started. Then he stopped. "The clause. In the agreement. I remember signing it. I remember why I wanted it there. I thought it would never, I didn't think it would matter. It matters, I said. Natalie. He looked at me directly for the first time since he'd arrived. What we had was real. For a long time, it was real. I know I'm not in any position to ask for anything, but I want you to know that I know what I threw away. I know it now. I believed him, actually. I think sometimes the recognition comes too late to be useful, and this was one of those times. I appreciate you saying that, I said, and I meant it. But knowing what you threw away doesn't change the terms of the agreement. And honestly, Derek, it doesn't change what I need, which is to be done with this, fairly and completely. He nodded. He didn't try to argue. The divorce was finalized the following spring. I received my 60% share of the net family property, which included a significant portion tied to the assessed value of the restaurant business. The business has continued to operate. I'm not a person who wanted to destroy something that other people depended on for their livelihoods, including the staff. But Derek's stake in it is considerably reduced, which means so is his ability to make decisions without accountability. I'm told things have been harder for him operationally since then. I try not to keep tabs on it, because my energy is better spent elsewhere. I opened my own independent financial consulting firm 8 months ago. I have 14 clients, several of whom came directly from referrals. I live in a condo I bought with my own money in Hamilton, near the water, and on Friday evenings in the summer, I sit on my balcony and watch the lake and feel like myself in a way I had quietly stopped feeling for longer than I care to admit. I want to say something directly to anyone who might be in a situation like mine, or something close to it. The thing that Derek misunderstood, and this is not unique to him, it's a very common misunderstanding, is that quiet capability is not the same as no capability. When someone is steady and consistent and doesn't need to announce their competence, it can look like smallness to someone who has mistaken loudness for power. But those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. Know what you've signed. Know your legal rights. In Ontario, and across Canada, there are specific protections in place for people navigating marriage breakdown, and those protections exist because the law understands that relationships involve vulnerability. The Family Law Act is there for a reason. A cohabitation agreement or marriage contract, when properly made, is not a cynical document, it is an honest one. It says, "We are building something together, and we are being clear-eyed about what that means for both of us." Do not let anyone convince you that understanding your rights is a betrayal of love. It is not. It is an act of respect for both people in a relationship and for yourself. And please, if you are going through something like this, get your own lawyer. Someone who is there for you specifically, not for the process in general, not for your partner's interests. Your own legal counsel. It matters more than you might think in the early days, when everything is overwhelming, and the other person seems to have already thought of every angle. The other thing I want to say is this. Being underestimated is painful. There is no version of that experience that doesn't carry a particular kind of hurt, especially when it comes from someone who was supposed to see you clearly. But being underestimated by the wrong person is also, sometimes, the most accurate signal you'll ever receive that you are standing in the wrong place. When Derek handed me that business card and told me to call his lawyer, he genuinely believed he was removing me from the equation. He did not understand that he was handing me exactly the opening I needed to stand fully inside my own story for the first time in years. I walked into that meeting on Bay Street, carrying everything I needed. I walked out with my footing back under me, and everything that has happened since has been built on that ground. It is solid. It is mine. And I am, for the first time in a very long time, exactly where